So apparently, if you take Misty Flare Dragon and Angel Feathers and smash them together, you get Light and Darkness Dragon. I've not done the math, but I don't think that adds up. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today we've got another Tuesday reveal, and as seen as we are in the midst of Lyrical Monasterio season, which is Bermuda Triangle season 2.0 with the Overdress era, we got some more right line reveals, and this time we would get the right line for Celestial, and interesting enough, apparently we're gonna see a pattern, or at least I'm gonna assume that this is going to be a pattern for the main right lines in the set, where just like what we saw with Token Rambu, it's going to be the same unit all the way up from grade 0 to grade 3 in different forms with different abilities that of course all accumulate together into their main grade 3 boss unit. And we knew that for this particular right line, Celestial, that she would do something with the bind zone. Now everybody immediately, myself included, thought about Mystery Flare and Gear Chronicle. Would this be a Gear Chronicle 2.0? Well, now that the skills are in, it is something I didn't expect, and I think a lot of players didn't expect this, and honestly it's very interesting. Let's take a look at these new cards, this new right line for Lyrical Monasterio, and see what she brings to the table and what type of gameplay this is. Now first off, we got just the generic starter with the obvious starter skill, which this time is called Monochromic Personality Celestial, and here we can see that it's the same unit as the grade 3, and this is going to be the same case for the grade 1 and the grade 2. Now, if we move up to the grade 1, we see Indecisive Sky Celestial, and she has the following ability. Although, when a unit is placed on a Vanguard circle, bind the top card of your deck. So this is how we're gonna put cards into the bind zone, by just binding them from the top of the deck, which is nice because this in itself doesn't force us to have other key pieces to do this for us, or put it from the drop zone of the field like we saw with V-Series Gear Chronicle. But now we get to the plot twist here, because she has the following effect as well, which is White Wings, this is a new keyword, continues on Vanguard Circle. When you would write from your right deck, you may Soul Blast 1 instead of choose a card from your hand and discard it. So this effect changes the way how we do the right deck skill itself. So now by Soul Blasting 1, we negate the minus. So it's a Soul Blast 1 as for a plus, which is actually really nice. Now, you might think to yourself, what is this White Wing? This is the new mechanic of this particular right line, which interacts with the bind zone. Basically how this works is that White Wings and Black Wings are conditions that interact with your bind zone, and if you meet the specific criteria, you can activate those effects. Now for White Wings, you must have only odd graded cards in your bind zone. So that means you can only have grade 1s and grade 3s or maybe grade 5s or whatever in your bind zone. If all the cards in your bind zone have an odd grade, the White Wings abilities will activate. That means if there is just one even number in the bind zone, the skill won't activate. So if there's one grade 0 or one grade 2 or one grade 4 in the bind zone, the White Wings ability will not activate because there's a non-odd graded unit in the bind zone. For Black Wings, it's the exact opposite because you need to have only even graded cards in your bind zone. So that means only grade 0s, only grade 2s, only grade 4s. So you need to set up your bind zone accordingly to get either White Wings or Black Wings. You can never have them both because for White Wings you must only have uneven cards, and for Black Wings you must only have even graded cards in your bind zone. That means the moment that you have a grade 1 and a grade 2 in your bind zone, neither of these abilities activate, and you need to remove one of the two to activate the one that's corresponding to that specific grade. And as we saw with this ability, the moment we write her, we bind the top card of the deck, and it's basically a 50-50 hit to see what we would get. Now, we saw the White Wing ability, which allows to just change the way how we perform the right deck interaction, but she also has the Black Wing ability, which is continues on Vanguard Circle. All of your opponent's grade 1 or less rearguards cannot attack this unit. So either you're going to get a free plus, so to speak, or if you went first, your opponent cannot rush you. Because if you went first, that means your opponent is going to ride to grade 1 and they can start attacking you, but because you potentially have this Black Wings ability active, there's no point for them calling grade 1s to the front row because they cannot even attack with it either way. So this is a very interesting skill that can help you to negate early rushes, or it allows you to plus on your hand in the early game. Now, sadly, you don't have control over this, because if we could control this, then if you go first, probably the Blackwings is better, but if you went second, probably the Whitewings is better, because that means the following turn that your opponent's going to attack you, they are going to ride up to grade 2 and they can just call grade 2s. So if we're going to get some more rear guards that allow us to manipulate the bind zone as well, then maybe the skill is going to be very interesting, as we might have more control over this. But so far, it's just top deck RNG at this point. Now, if we move over to the grade 2, we see similar things here, because the grade 2 is shining as is Celestial, and she has the ability, although when a unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, choose a card from your bind zone, put it on the bottom of your deck, and if you put a card, bind the top card of your deck face up. So as we're gonna see here, this deck doesn't really revolve mainly around binding as much cards as we want, because you just only care for if you have only even and only odds, and the less cards in the bind zone, the more consistently you're gonna get that off, because it's less likely that you accidentally bind one of the other type in the bind zone. And this is a nice skill that just resets the bind zone and binds another card, which basically guarantees you always get either one of the two abilities. Now, for her case, the Whitewings and Blackwings abilities are as following. We got Whitewings, act on Vanguard circle once a turn, cost counter +1, and this unit gets critical +1 until the end of turn. So it can swing for a double critical. Or Blackwings continues a Vanguard circle. During the battle this unit attacked, your opponent cannot call trigger units from their hand to the Guardian circle. This is actually a really nice skill, because in the early game, a lot of players tend to guard with triggers, because a trigger makes it a over trigger to pass, as they just have only one drive check, and if you don't hit the over trigger, 15k shield is enough if they don't boost the Vanguard. This is a tactic that a lot of players, myself included, employ to negate a lot of early damage. This effect can negate that to some extent, as it forces your opponent to waste a lot more cards from hand that they might not really want to waste in this early on in the game. Now, one thing is interesting here. If we get support cards that allow us to manipulate the bind zone during the main phase on turn 2, we potentially could get away by activating both these effects, because the Whitewings is a act ability and the Blackwings is a continuous effect that activates during the battle phase. So if her skill puts a uneven card in the bind zone, we can use the Whitewings ability, and then after we counter +1 and get it in critical, and we can then manipulate the bind zone again to put an even number in there with all the unevens out of it, then on attack we can get the guard restrict while this Vanguard swings with double crit. That could be a very spicy thing. Now, of course, it's all pure speculation. I don't know if we get these type of support cards on turn 2, and how consistent is it going to be, depending on how many cards we need to pull this thing off. But it's an interesting thought experiment to have. But now we get to the main grade 3, and let's see where this all accumulate towards and what the main play or the main player is here. We of course got Archangel of Twin Wings, Celestial. And Celestial has the ability, Auto Vanguard Circle, at the beginning of your main phase, choose a card from your bind zone, put it into your hand, and if you put a card, bind the top card of your deck face up. This is actually a really good skill, because this is basically a delayed draw, or in the case of your first grade 3 ride, you immediately draw the card from your bind zone that you put there on your grade 2 turn. And in every subsequent turn, you're gonna get that card that you just bind from the top into your hand, which is nice, because if you accidentally bind a persona ride, or maybe a trigger that can be solid shield value or a combo piece, you're gonna get that the following turn, and your opponent has nothing that they can interact with to negate that, which is great. It's a 3+ every single turn. But on top of that, it also reloads the bind zone, where you're going to at least have another shot at either the Blackwings or Whitewings ability, which is also a nice interaction. But let's take a look at what her Whitewings and Blackwings ability is going to be. So her Whitewings effect is, continues a Vanguard Circle. During your turn, this unit gets power +5k and critical +1. So just an 18k double crit attacker. It's fine, it's not overly amazing, but keep in mind she also has that extra +1 every single turn, so that combined together for no resource, mind you, is actually pretty decent. But then we also got Blackwings, and this is actually really spicy, which is continuous a Vanguard Circle. During your turn, all of your opponent's units get power -5k. Yeah, we got a Zeal on our hand. That's also really nice. So this can be great if you want to push more without relying on the critical, or just don't really care for the center column to be a lot of pressure. You want every single column to be a lot of pressure. This is a nice ability that allows you to give that. Now, Of course, if we see with all these cards right now, it's pure RNG. Our right line will every single time, every single turn, we're going to bind the top card of the deck, and that will determine if we get the Blackwings or Whitewings. So far, it looks to be that we can only put one card in the bind zone at a time. And that means you are guaranteed to have either one of the effects, because I remind you once again, to get these effects off, for Whitewings, you need to have only uneven graded card in your bind zone. If there is at least one other card that's an even, while the rest is uneven, you get none of the effects. And for Blackwings, you want only even cards in your bind zone, and I mean with that grades, not the amount of cards. So you want only even graded cards in your bind zone for the Blackwings ability. So the more cards in your bind zone, the less consistent these effects are going to be. And with this right line, it looks to be that there's only going to be maximum of one card in your bind zone, which is nice, but we haven't seen any support cards as of yet. So we can have other support cards that might put more cards in the bind zone and maybe turn the bind zone into some kind of resource engine or something else. It's all just pure speculation at this point. I'm very curious of what direction they're going to take this. Now, honestly, I am very surprised to these effects, because this wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting a Mystery Flare 2.0. But to be real here, I wished that Mystery Flare was this. This looks to be like a much more interesting mechanic and playstyle than whatever Mystery Flare ever was. Mystery Flare is just accelerating to a point, and you're done once you reach that point, and that's it. You're just focusing on binding as fast as many cards as possible to reach the threshold, and you're basically done. It's just the same thing over and over every single game. At some point it gets a bit stale. In this case, you're going to see every single turn, you're going to get something else. It's every time a 50-50. Do I get this skill or do I get that skill? Can I interact it with my abilities or not? Can I interact it for a more resource engine? You're trying to go through the flow, and your deck will somewhat dictate what pattern you're going to take, and you as a player need to navigate through the river or whatever, through the route that your deck is providing you, and it's then to you as a player to see how good you can navigate through that, which is to me a lot more interesting and also a lot more fluid and a bit more interactive than what Mystery Flare provided with just the bind zone mechanic as a whole. But that's just how the deck plays. The playstyle is going to be unique every single time because it's RNG related. But what's more interesting is the deck building that can go beyond this. Because what this reminds me of, for any Hearthstone players out there, this reminds me of the Witchwood expansion and the two main legendaries. I believe they're called Gen Greyman and I believe Baku or something, that weird other 9-cost legendary. Basically, these legendaries have the fact that they will give you a effect at the beginning of your game if your entire deck comprised out of only uneven costed cards or even costed cards. This reminds me of that, because now we might see players that can maybe just build a generic deck and they're gonna roll with the punches that the deck gives them, or if they see either the Blackwings or Whitewings ability and they want to tailor the deck towards that playstyle, they might build a deck with a more emphasis on only even cards or maybe only uneven cards. Of course, in Vanguard we cannot do a pure build of this because triggers are a thing and triggers count as even numbers, and if you want to persona right, you also need a couple of grade 3s. So you're somewhat limited, but beyond that, you can experiment with maybe running a significant amount of grade 2s to increase the odds of only getting even. Or you can drop almost every single grade 2 and just go for grade 3s and grade 1s because they can still build columns and it gives you more consistency of getting those uneven effects. That's actually really interesting because now this same playstyle might spawn 2, 3, 4 different decks because of the fact that players might dedicate a direction for their playstyle, for their strategies, which is really interesting. I am all for this type of stuff, and I cannot wait to see what the other support cards around this are going to be. Will we see rearguards with Blackwing Bindwings abilities, or will we see rearguards that interact with the bind zone, turning it into another way of a resource tool or research engine? I'm very curious of what the future support for this particular ride line is going to bring, and I'm now way more interested and locked in for Lyrical Monasterio for the other ride lines, because if the other ride lines are anything like this, oh boy! That is going to be spicy. Of course, this hasn't been all the reveals because we also saw Shaman King reveals, and they basically showed us the mechanic for the Shaman King collab set. And it's interesting, but am not completely convinced that this is going to be a big impact, but let's take a look at what they brought to the table, and maybe you're going to be more hyped for the Shaman King expansion or the Shaman King collab set. I am somewhat optimistic that we might see this in English, because Shaman King is a lot bigger here than, let's say, Monster Strike, so who knows, we might see this in the future. Now, we saw 2 cards of the original trial deck that's gonna come with the Shaman King collab set, and one of those cards is this grade 1 that's called Amiidamaru, and it has the ability continuous Vanguard circle. During your turn, if you have a Vanguard with Joao Sakura in its card name, this unit gets power plus 5k, and if your Vanguard is Oversoul, this is a new mechanic, this turn, this unit gets critical plus 1. An important thing to note here is that this is a grade 1 with 0 critical printed on the card. So in order for this thing to actually hit for damage, you need to have the effect of this unit activated to at least get him 1 critical. Now, is this a big thing? Not necessarily, because most of the grade 1s are just gonna boost, and boosting with 0 critical doesn't impact the damage at all because you only transfer the power. The only thing is that you cannot use this card to rush in the early game. Now, what I'm assuming here is because this particular card, from what I remember, because I used to watch Shaman King like 20 years ago when I was still a little infant, I remember that this was a spirit from one of the main characters. In this case, Joao Sakura is the wielder of this particular spirit. I think all the spirits in Shaman King will have 0 critical and will have a skill that allows them to gain critical or more power or some effects if you go into Oversoul. And Oversoul, as we're going to see in a second, is basically putting this particular spirit, another copy of this, into the soul with the Oversoul effect. To clarify that even more, let's take a look at Joao Sakura, the wielder of this spirit. So this is the main grade 3 of the ride line, and I assume all the main characters will be their own ride line. He has the Oversoul ability, which is act on Vanguard circle once per turn, cost put a rearguard with Amiidamaru in its card name into your soul, draw a card, and until the end of turn, this unit gets continuous Vanguard circle. All of your front row units get power plus 5k. So the Oversoul ability is basically put a specific unit into the soul and you turn it Oversoul. And then I assume that every single other main grade 3 will have other bonus effects. This draws a card and gets the continuous Vanguard circle ability that gives the entire front row plus 5k power. Now, the interesting thing here is that it specifies a unit with Amiidamaru in its card name, so maybe if we get other versions of that spirit in the main set, then maybe we can increase the consistency, because so far it looks to be a bit inconsistent because you need to put 1 of 4 specific cards into the soul to acquire this, and you also need to do that to get the spirit at least a critical and that extra 5k power. So it feels a bit wonky right now, but if we see more cards with the same name, then this could shift completely. Now, the continuous Vanguard circle ability is really interesting because this is actually the exact same thing that we saw on the field order or the set order for Lyrical Monasterio that costs 2 counterblast. In this case, it costs you a rearguard, but you draw a card back. But because you need to put a specific unit into the soul, it's a bit less consistent, but overall still a nice thing, especially if we see multi-tech going on. Right now we don't see that because we only have these 2 cards. Now, on top of that, Joao Sakura also has a secondary effect, which is auto on Vanguard circle. When this unit attacks, if your damage zone has 4 or more cards, costs counter plus 1, and this unit gets critical plus 1 until the end of battle. Limit break 4, counter plus 1 critical. It's not good. I don't like this effect. It's just mainly the Oversoul ability that's interesting. So far, it's too early to judge how this will perform, how good this is going to be. Right now, it looks to be very clunky because you have only 4 specific units that can activate this effect. But again, if we're going to see more cards with the Amiidamaru name, maybe we get Amiidamaru dash and a grade 2 and a grade 3 version or a grade 0 version, whatever, then this could completely change, because then we might see a deck with the, I think, let's say, wielder of the spirit, and then a bunch of versions of that spirit, which then can activate to put them into the Oversoul, and then all the other versions might get overpowered because of the Oversoul abilities that they then also attain. It can be a very interesting mechanic, but we have to wait and see until we see the execution to understand if it's going to be good or not. Right now, it doesn't look all too good, but I'm going to be honest, it's too early to say, as it can completely change with 1 or 2 cards, and I assume we might going to see those cards in the near future, or semi-far future once we enter the last quarter of this year. But that also concludes this particular Cardfight update. Now, for next week, we're going to get some exciting news, because for us, at least on this channel, what's important is that next week we're finally going to see more V-Series V Clan Collection reveals, because they're gonna show Daikaiser as the second V Clan Collection or V Selection reveal. So I know Different Fight is gonna be very excited for this. They're of course gonna save the best for last, because I assume Chronos Command Dragon will be one of the last ones, and they're gonna start with the weaker ones. Sorry, Different Fight, but I have to say it. And then also next week we're gonna see more promos for the main nation, so that's the 5 main nations of set 1 and set 2, and we're also going to see the overtrigger for Lyrical Monasterio. Now, I don't know if they only will show one, because we saw multiple artworks, or will that mean that all the overtrigger artworks will be different names but the same effect? I don't know, they only specify the overtrigger for Lyrical Monasterio. So we got some more exciting stuff to talk about next week. Sadly, no new ride line as of next week, but I think that's gonna happen in a week after that. So still a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon. But that said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of this new mechanic for Lyrical Monasterio, this new ride line, as well as this new Mystery Flare 2.0, as well as, are you actually excited for Shaman King? Do you think this Oversoul mechanic has potential? Do you like the idea? I'm very curious about that. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you guys are actually interested in me covering the Shaman King reveals in the future, because usually I skip collapse it, there's not really a lot of hype. I think Shaman King might have potential, because a lot more people in the West actually grew up with Shaman King and actually are interested in Shaman King. So let me know in the comments down below if you want me to cover those cards. And if there's enough traction for it, then I might actually do that in the coming months once they actually start revealing these cards. But with that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com. You guys are amazing as you make everything on this channel possible. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one!